My name is Brian Sackett. I'm a board member for Spiritual Awakenings International. I'm also the co-chair of the Sharing Experiencer Circles. And we're going to have the Porting Spiritually Transformative Experiences Experiencers panel. And it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker on that panel. So Dr. Pierluigi Lattuada is an active leader of many transpersonal psychology initiatives. And that includes being the founder of a group called Biotrans Energetics and the CEO of the Integral Transpersonal Institute of Milan. He's the president of Eurotas, which is the global transpersonal network. And he's published over 20 books and several scientific articles. So please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Pierluigi Lattuada.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Yvonne, for inviting me. I am excited to share with you some of my experience. As we told with Yvonne, I suppose that this conference is more for sharing experience, and I would like to start to share some of what I think was one of the most awakening experiences in my life, and then I will try to share with you some of maps of that experience, which was the basis of the creation of Biotrans Energetics that become the methodology that I am teaching and my psychotherapy model of heal people. Everything started in 1982 in Brazil. A coincidence and synchronicity. The first one spoke about mediunity in Brazil, and I spent 20 years in Brazil, 2 months per year for 20 years in Brazil. So it's my second homeland, the Brazil. But that day, about the first week of July of the 1982, I went to Brazil the first time, and to me Brazil was because my wife was Brazilian. So, but to me, Brazil was just macumba, samba, carnival. I was not so, so linked with Brazil. I didn't like even to be there, but I said, okay, I look around. I know there is spiritism, there is macumba. Let me find some. And a relative of my wife was one of the disciples of one of center of spiritism. So I decided to go there, and in the morning of that day, I woke up with a fever, very high fever, and very sick. And my brother-in-law said, this is because you are a medium, you are a psychic. I said, don't say this. But I decided to go anyway. And when I entered that very poor place, all colored people and very simple, I was looking around and say, what I am doing here? And the priestess, after a time, called me. There were drumming and chanting and smoking, and she started to give me passes in that way. She started smoke on my head, and I started shaking, and I felt down. I entered in a sort of state that later I started to recognize as trance, because in that time I was 29, very young. And I saw a voice of the priestess saying to me, "Wake up, stand up, now you have your guide, now you are one of us." I woke up and the fear was completely disappeared. And that people that before I was looking at them in a very judgmental way, I saw all them as brother and sisters, as if all were one. It was so incredible, this reset that happens in 10 minutes. I completely changed. This completely changed my life. It was something simple to say, but was, to me, was the first experience to shift from the head to the heart. And I lived with all my bodies, and I see how my complete, not only my state of consciousness, but all my bodies changed in that moment, and everything was different. This, I say, this was the first experience that opened me the door to the heart. Since then, 40 and more years, and the journey is still going on, of course. But this was the first time I saw that this was possible, and this happens. But this week was an incredible week, the most incredible week in my life, because 2 days later, I knew of a psychiatrist that was working with crazy people, using the psychic of the center, the medium of the spiritist center. So I went to know him, and the setting is this: the psychiatrist, the medium, and the client. And the medium start captation, they say captation, start to captate the energy, the entity, and any is happening into the client, and the psychiatrist work with the entity, educating the entity of the client through the psychic, through the medium. Of course, I am 29 and was one of the first experience of this. I was very shocked, but more after that process of captation, the medium entered in another state of trance and received, she said, a caboclo as an entity. She received this caboclo, started smoking, and started going to take the cure for that guy, and starting applying to him his energy to heal the guy. And it was very incredible. So I asked to the psychiatrist, where you learned this? He said, but I learned this to another doctor, but he's very strange. Let people fall down on the floor. And I saw to him, I asked him, please give me where it is. And I went to him, and he was in a fazenda, in a farm. He created this clinic in a farm where he was healing, working with psychiatric people, with no drugs, just with psychic, working with them. I was there, and a psychic, a medium came and said to me, but you are medium. Again, you, now I want to teach you how to do. And there were a guy that was walking all day with no stop. He didn't sleep, just walking. And she told me, enter in contact with him. What you say? Try to, because she learned to me to captate the guy through a draw. She said, now draw the end. What are you feeling? What we are. So I draw something, but with my great surprise, when the guy was away, I felt myself as if I was still linked with him. He was walking far, but as if he stayed in me. I was very impressed of this experience, and she said to me, "Ha ha ha! I know because you enter in the vibration of him. Come, but now I will free you." I lay down. She lay down, and she gave my hand and started speaking as the guy, captating him to me, started speaking as a guy. Okay, but when I draw, I had the feeling of the inside that the problem was, one of the problem was that he should say to her mother how much he loved her and never told. So I thought in my mind, tell your mother that you love her. Just in my mind, thinking. The woman stopped to speak with the voice of a man and started to speak about the woman and saying, I don't care with you. To me, you can also fall into the swimming pool and die. I have no any interest in you. So I again say, no, don't mind. Tell her that you love. In that moment, she changed again the word, the voice, started speaking at the voice of him, saying, "I mother, I love you," and so and so and so. And when we finished, I felt so light, so heavy, as the first experience of the heart. So these three experience that I had in 3-4 days that changed completely my worldview and my experience of life. And from then I started to receive, because all the biotransenergetic, now it is a methodology that is taught to university. My institute is accredited by the Ministry of University, and I have almost 250 psychotherapists that are doing the methodology I create. But that biotransenergetic, from them, as if something opens in my mind, I started receiving maps, model, and as if the master inside, the voice of the master inside, started to giving me all the knowledge that started in 82 and still is going on. This about experience. And now I would like to share with you some of the maps of biotransenergetics that since then I received, and now they are the epistemological maps that are at the basis of the work I do. One is the first, is something very simple, but very deep to me. We always, as if we always live on the square, means what appear on stage. And we always forget the circle, what there is behind. Behind or around or over. When we are in our ordinary life and our rational mind just get the appearance. Also think to the evidence-based medicine. Evidence-based. What appears, what is evident? But for the Buddhist, what is evident is illusion. So the challenge is to get both the square and what there is and the circle. And if we don't do something in any moment, even now, if we don't do something, we only stay on the square, on the stage, and we forget what there is on the backstage. For example, now I am speaking, of course, and you are listening. This is square. This is appearance. This is also what there is on stage. But if you want, we want to have an integral experience, which to me means experience by the heart, which is almost the same. We should do something, for example, see and feel what there is behind the word, from that this word comes. And not just the word, but the feeling, for example. What are you feeling while I am speaking? Beside my spaghetti English, what are you feeling? What is flowing to you? And if we remember this, I call this, with the first attention, we get the square. With the second attention, this term is stolen by Castaneda. With the second attention, we can get the circle. And if you want to have an integral experience in any moment, we should do something very simple. Shift from the first attention to the second attention. In any moment. Of course, it's something very simple and very difficult, because you say, but what there is now on the backstage? Of course, the circle is a metaphor of the self, of the cosmos, of the everything. But in any moment, what is appearing is hiding something. For example, as I told, if I am aware, if I focus on the words, maybe I get the meaning, but I don't get the feeling. If I get the feeling, maybe I can go beyond the feeling and feel the flow of the essence from where the feeling is coming. And this process is a never-ending process. First attention, second attention, first attention, second attention. Square and circle. In any moment, I can ask myself what there is behind, what I am forgetting. This is one of the simple, and we could say that all the rest of the work is to be able to do this in any moment. For example, we could say that the circuit of that experience of square and circle, how does it work? Means which is the game. In any moment, we are giving the experience of the world through feeling, knowing, and acting. These three functions, knowing, acting, and feeling, are always part of my experience. But usually, or you are focusing on feeling, or in acting, or in knowing, most in knowing. But to do this, to get this, we should integrate the knower, the feeler, and the doer in one moment. But how can we do this? Because as I told, if you are not aware, we just get a part. Of course, we should develop the observer. We know. When I can be aware that I am not just feeling, doing, and knowing, but I can observe myself knowing, feeling, and doing. By realizing and activating the observer, I can create, I can master my inner experience. So I can do that shift to integrate the feeling, the square and the circle. But the more I experience, the more I observe, for example, meditation, no? All of us are experiencing in practical meditation. But when we do meditation, what happens? I observe, for example, my breath. I observe me watching. I observe me, which is perfect. I train my presence. But if I don't do something, means even meditating is in the square. Because the circle is the essence, is ever, is everything. I don't need to get, I already am. If you see again the square and the circle, you see that everything happens in the square is already in the circle. If I practice a meditation as if I am trying to get something means as if I am in the square and I forget the circle, because I am already at home. Everything is sacred, everything is the self. I am or ever where I have to be. Of course, this seems a paradox. But this paradox, to me, we overcome the paradox when we realize that the observation observe ourselves observing. By this process of first and second attention, having the map of the circle, the essence, the self in which we are, you can shift from trying to be aware by a practice to it's already happening. The self is aware, not the ego, of course. So everything I can do is only something try to get. But if I have only the map of the observer, if I have only the map to, I have to meditate to get presence. Yes, and then when I finish meditation, what happens? I go again being the same person I were, concerned with the bill, concerned with the lack of love, of money. What I want to say is that through these maps, which comes from insight, of course, that started at that long time ago, is that we tend to forget that the essence, the self, is already here. That we have not consciousness, we are into the consciousness. The consciousness is the flow in which we are. If I try to go somewhere, I am not respecting in my vision the game. I am not respecting. I am I can get no satisfaction because I always try to get something and I am not aware that we already are. That already the observation observe ourselves knowing, doing and feeling. And this is a process, unitary process. One more map, and maybe the last one. When you tell me how much time I still have?
You have about 5 minutes left.
5 minutes, okay. This is another map which I love so much. I call this the further mode. This to me is the making the two one. And also in the Gospel of St. Thomas, there is the sentence, if you don't make the two one, you don't enter the even. Making the two one, stage, backstage, and something more, the self, the essence, ever here. Because, as I told you, all of us, we are speaking here, we are aware about meditation practice, spiritual practice. But what I want to say, or what I realize, maybe how many realization I still have to do, but what I realize that by doing the practice, we fall into the ambush of go away instead of go home. Because we should do, before do practice, we should be aware what I am doing, what is that backstage in that moment, and how can make the two one, because the law seems to be making the two one. The last one, this I call the essential trance, means how can I get this? How can I get this? How can I get this? Essential trance means, to me, there are three big categories of attitude you can get. The first one, disappear. You actually doesn't exist. You want to solve a problem, forget the problem, disappear to the problem, let the problem where it is, and choose the essence, because you are at home ever, even when you are full of problem, even when you are sick, you are at home. Get home first, disappear first. Then, if you disappear, you should do the zero. I say, we pass to the zero. Let the problem where it is, as if you are at home and there are guests. Let the guests where they are, but be aware that you are at home. The second one, stay. Disappear. You are not so important. You don't need to solve problem. Disappear and stay. By staying, if I stay, here I am. I am at home. And the force of the self start working. The forces inside, the spirit, we could say, start working. And the self is, we could say, the archetype of the unity. And these holotropics go to the unity and to the harmony. So if I stay, no, where it is. If I disappear, yes, if I disappear to myself and I stay, the force of the self start working, the spirit start working, and I can become, because again I am aware that I am you. So I become the force that is rising inside. I overcome the boundary between me that I am observing and you, and let the force works and transform, because my epistemology says the self is working. Let it work. Okay.
Thank you.
Some of map I got in my experience.
Thank you. That was both interesting and touching on multiple levels, including knowing and feeling. Thank you. I'd like to now welcome our next speaker, Isabel Clarke, who's the founder of the United Kingdom Spiritual Crisis Network. He's the author of several books exploring the themes of spirituality, mental health, and being human. And she's the recent recent author of Meeting Mental Health Breakdown Mindfully. So please join me in warmly welcoming Isabel Clarke.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this very exciting conference. Hope and support for travellers between the worlds, the work of the UK Spiritual Crisis Network. So that's the main thing that I'm going to be talking about. I'll stop sharing for a minute so that I can talk to you. I want to start off with a quotation from David Abrams' great book, The Spell of the Sensuous. There is another world. It's this one. So hold that paradox in your mind. So I actually am not the founder of, I'm very honored to be called that. That was Catherine Lucas. But I have been a very central member of the Spiritual Crisis Network in the UK for all of its 18 years. And I'm proud that we keep going and we carry on keeping going. And so I'll be telling you about that. And I'll also cover where I'm coming from in relation to this field, because I've written books on psychosis and spirituality and about this area of interface. And in the things that I write and the way that I explore these ideas, I'm trying to get a balance between science and mystery in a way that keeps faith with both of them. And that might sound a bit theoretical, but actually in terms of the work of the Spiritual Crisis Network, it's in fact very practical, because understanding how the other world operates is key to navigating it safely and, importantly, not being seduced by it. So first of all, I'm going to share the screen again and just trot through what the Spiritual Crisis Network is and a few key things in its history. So it was founded at the second of the Revisioning Mental Health conferences, which were organized by Catherine Lucas. So she is our founder and she worked very hard with us for the first few years. She is now an author of books, one of which I'm putting at the end of my slides. In the first years, quite quickly, we set up a legal framework. We are a company limited by guarantee. We've very often gone towards becoming a full charity, but it's really complicated. And we've always been a small group of very dedicated people. We've never really managed to sort of expand but I think we've managed to do an immense amount despite that. What we did do to start off with, I think the idea was called the network, because we thought that what we would be was a network of groups of people supporting individuals going through spiritual crisis. And there was such a group of people in Glastonbury who were part of the founding lot. But as often happens, this is very hard work. And these networks don't necessarily, these little groups don't necessarily survive. So that it hasn't quite worked out in that way. But what we did starting off was to set up a website. And once you've got a website, you of course have a contact function. And when you have a contact function and you're called the Spiritual Crisis Network, people in spiritual crisis contact you. And you have got to know what to say to them. And you've got to be helpful. So we set up an email response system with training to support each other, supporting the people, and to give really good quality, responsible, hopeful answers to those people who came to us through the website. And that actually has been the core of the work that we've done. Anyone who wants to be really engaged with our network, really a part of it, there are lots of other things they can do, but they have got to regularly come on our little teams of email responders. But we've also have another function, which is to spread a different, more hopeful message about anomalous experiencing, going through strange, weird and wonderful things. Than the one that tends to be given to people in England who break down. They tend to go along to their doctor, their family sort of gets a bit worried about them, and they tend to be told that they've got some horrible diagnosis, and this is extremely discouraging, and they're put on some very strong drugs and tends to be dangerous, end of story. So we were looking both at our own experience, because we're a mixture of experiencers and professionals like myself, all of us interested in spirituality and this whole area. We looked at actually a lot of research that shows that taking this seriously from a spiritual perspective is actually better for people than diagnosing it away. And we've, a part of our work is to spread that message. So we've organized a whole lot of conferences. I've tried, I might not have got them all, but here's a quick list I'll run through. 2011, Psychosis and Spirituality, Inner Journeys in a Time of Transition. That one was in Liverpool. Finding Solid Ground. That one was in Sunderland. Evolving a New Paradigm, Spirituality and Mental Health, Breakthrough, Munsley in Norfolk. 2015, Release the Potential Within Spiritual Crisis, Stroud. We took part in the launch of the wonderful film Crazy Wise in Amsterdam. There was a conference in 2016 in London. You notice there's a lot happening then. That's because we had a very bright spark working with us, Katie Mottram, who's also written books and things, and she blazed through, got money, did stuff, and now is doing her own, has got her own, can't remember what it's called, but anyway, I've got, I think, yeah. Then there's a bit of a gap. 2022, we picked up again online webinars, Spiritual Crises, because of course in the gap you've got COVID and everything goes over the internet, and so did we. Online webinars, Spiritual Crises, supporting positive transformations, but also lots of workshops, talks, lots of training for professionals. As I say, Katie Mottram did a lot of training of professionals. And importantly, the little groups. Now, the London group and the Sheffield group carried on all the way through. Other ones came, went. The West Country group is pretty good. But of course, in lockdown, they all went online. Some of them are partly online, and there is the Anywhere group. And it is seriously anywhere. There are people from the Antipodes and sometimes the States and all sorts of places that you haven't necessarily heard of can join that group. And that is incredibly important offering. So how did I get involved in all this? Where do I come from? So I'll explain that one. I've been wrestling with this overlap, this area, and it's about words. Psychosis is a word, spirituality is a word. So the first paper that I published on this is called Finding a Language, because the trouble about words is they do two things simultaneously. They categorize, they separate things out, and they simultaneously stick things together. And spirituality sticks, whatever you're talking about, with light, up, floaty, lovely. And psychosis splits it with yuck, disease, horrible, awful. So you've kind of lost the argument before you started it. So you need a different language. And that was the first thing that I was looking at. I was writing a book. I could see from my work, I came into clinical psychology in middle life. I retrained as a psychologist. I'd originally studied history, with specializing in medieval history, with a particular interest in the spiritual literature and the mystics. But of the breakdown of a friend when we were, well, I'll say that, actually I'll stop sharing for this bit. A breakdown of a friend when we were all in our 20s revealed to me the fact that the story that was told about mental breakdown just was not fit for purpose. There was something missing there. And also that the way in which she was treated horrified me. And I thought I wanted to do something about this. So I studied psychology. I got into the profession of clinical psychology in my mid-40s. And when I started working, half my job was in psychiatric rehab. So I was seeing people who for decades, quite often, had been in the system, had diagnoses of schizophrenia and what have you. And I was working there as a therapist, so quite a few of them told me their stories, which is the privilege that a therapist has. And I was really interested to learn that for a lot of them, when they told me about their early breakdown, what the sort of experiences that they had in early breakdown, of a feeling of oneness with the universe, a feeling of understanding everything, a feeling of opening up, of power, mirrored the experiences that I knew from the spiritual literature. But then everything got really frightening and out of control, and they found themselves in the system, and there they stayed. And this alerted me, there's something going on here. And so I investigated this, and I investigated the research around it, what had been done. And I wrote my 2 books on psychosis and spirituality. And when I was in the middle of writing one of them, I gathered together, or it was an edited book, so I got all the researchers and the people who'd done work on that together in a sort of little symposium. And out of that came a conference, and there were 2 psychosis and spirituality conferences. So I'll carry on with the story. And yeah, the Psychosis and Spirituality Exploring the New Frontier was published then, and there's a second edition, Consolidating the New Paradigm, in 2010. And in 2004, Catherine Lucas approached me because of this work. And she asked me, she also was keen to revision mental health. She wanted to address precisely this area because of her own experiences. And she asked me to give a keynote at that conference, which I did. And it was a very successful conference. So there was another one in 2005. And at the end of the 2005 one, the bunch of us got together under the leadership of Catherine to found the UK's Spiritual Crisis Network. And the Spiritual Crisis Network's approach, I'll again stop sharing a moment and give a little fill in. There had been a spiritual emergency network in England before that, which had fizzled, I think, a few years before. But it was different in character to what emerged as the Spiritual Crisis Network, because it had been very much put together from people from the transpersonal therapy world, psychosynthesis and transpersonal therapy. And it had been very much composed of therapists who saw, you know, a transpersonal therapy as a good way forward, which it can well be. But in England, where there is not a system of universal health insurance, because there's the National Health Service, therapies like transpersonal therapy, people have to pay for. So it's you know, there's a gate to who can get it. And we wanted to create something that would be universally applicable, universally available to people. All right, let's go back to the slides. So, where were we coming from? The key elements of our approach to spiritual crisis were not making a distinction between spiritual crisis and mental health stroke illness. When I was investigating the literature before writing my books, in the 1990s, the early 1990s, the big question everybody seemed to be addressing was, how do we tell the difference between a spiritual emergency and a psychosis? Because unfortunately, they can look rather similar. So we must find out what the difference is. And as I've already indicated, I decided that this was a problem of language. And it was actually more useful to look at what was going on here. This is an area of human experiencing. Let's understand it, and let's then understand how it goes wrong, how it causes dysfunction and distress and that sort of thing, so that we can help something about that. So the Spiritual Crisis Network does not, anybody, whoever gets in touch with us, if they get in touch with us, they reckon they're going through a spiritual crisis. That's good enough for us. And I came in with Emma Bragdon was talking about grounding, and so great minds think alike. The importance of grounding in the physical present, self-care, really practical things, maintaining normal life as far as possible, that to navigate where the experiencing gets out of control. And alongside that, where, you know, try not to get divorced from ordinary, boring, everyday life, be in communication with people who understand this other dimension and have ways of making sense of it that maintains identity and self-image. And in the Spiritual Crisis Network, we will let in anybody's way of making sense of it, provided it's helpful to them. But also, however much we're suggesting an alternative way of looking at it to the mental health system and what have you, keeping safe is the most important thing. And in the context where we are in the UK, though people have tried to have, safe places where they can look after people, somebody in deep, deep crisis who has really lost their way actually does need the mental health services to keep them safe. So that is the advice that we give. If we think there is risk, we say, go to your doctor, but we will support you to find another way once you've got your feet a bit more back on the ground, other ways of looking at it once you're safe. So both and is a central tenet to this approach. And sit lightly to explanation, but recognize that there is this other way of knowing, the other world that is this one. And I've already mentioned how language was probably the first thing I grasped. So we need a language which enables us to explore in an open-minded way this other way of experiencing. And the language I adopt from Gordon Claridge, who did a lot of research into schizotypy, is the transliminal, across the threshold into that other world, which is this one. So I'm talking about balance, about going from one to the other. And the balance I'm going to be doing now is between science, what we do know, trying to pin down how much can we actually be certain of in what opens up this other world, and mystery. And the people that really know about this, of course, are not the scientists. They are the artists, the visionaries, the poets, and the mad people. So I'm going to start just with a few pictures very rapidly. Where are we? The artists. Again, as you know, I've already said the Middle Ages intrigue me. So Hildegard of Bingen's beautiful maps of beyond the threshold across transliminal, and the apocalypse of Beatus, whether it's more threatening, sort of frightening images, and Blake, one wonderful 18th century English poet, and his extraordinary visions and melting visions. And then I'm going to go on to a poet, big favorite, Rumi, 13th century Sufi poet. And I think this is just an extract from one of Rumi's poems, which I think just sums it up. I could probably stop there, but anyway, I won't. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. Where is the door? There are no walls around me. I won't go back to sleep. So, I'm afraid I'm going to go back to science. Boring. But what might be going on here? And this is something I've explored and I've written about, and it's anchored on a model of cognitive architecture, which is based on mind-numbingly detailed cognitive experimentation, which I'm not going to go into here. If you're interested in it, you can read my books and follow the references. But what the headline is that as human beings, we've got two distinct ways of experiencing, two distinct ways of meeting the world. So there aren't two worlds, there's one. The split is in us. And it's because our brains have two distinct wiring circuits. It's the way we're made. Mostly they work together. And when they're talking to each other and passing information backwards and forwards, we're in consensual reality and we feel in control and we know what's what. But if we cross the threshold, which happens when they get a bit desynchronized, we're on the other side. And when I'm working clinically, because I'm first and foremost, I'm a clinician, I talk about shared reality on this side of the threshold and unshared reality on the other side. And I've got a diagram also. Pierre, you've got diagrams with circles. I've got diagrams with circles. So I haven't got any squares in it, but I've got circles. And I've taken my diagram, comes from one of the therapies I used, which is called dialectical behavior therapy. And that just has reasonable mind and emotion mind. And this maps beautifully onto what interacting cognitive subsystems says, which I'm not going to go into. And as far as I'm concerned, this one gives us shared reality and ordinary thinking. When these two together are working together, it gives us shared reality and ordinary thinking. And when this one has really taken control, we can become open to the other ways of experiencing. And the reason why grounding and mindfulness are so powerful is this is that slippery place where we're in touch with both of them. And that is not, it's not somewhere that it is very easy or very natural to be for any length of time, but it is the place where you're in the present and in control. So as a therapist, it's a really important place to get people into. But at high and at low arousal, why is this not working? These two separate out and this one becomes more dominant, and the memory, this one has got time, so memory, threat memories are available all across the lifespan, hence the role of trauma in making this other reality more accessible. So it's useful to know the characteristics. This one's ordinary, clear limits, full access to precise meanings, separation between people, clear sense of self, emotions moderated and grounded, and governed by a logic of either or. Across the threshold, things feel supernatural and super special. Boundaries dissolve. This is a place where the boundaries are not there. Everything can be suffused with meaning or completely meaningless. Coincidences abound. The self can be lost in the whole or supremely important, a place of paradox. Emotions likewise, because it is governed by a logic of both and we can't get our minds around that. They're not built for it. So what causes you to cross the threshold? It's easier for some people than others. The highly creative, spiritual, psychic people have this ability to cross that threshold. Earlier trauma makes the threshold looser, easier. High stress, low stimulation, lack of sleep and food and human company all contribute to vulnerability. And substance use or substance abuse, all of these can be characteristics of either spiritual experience or the sorts of things that lead to a psychotic breakdown. And this is that dimension of openness to unusual experiences that's been explored in the schizotypy research. So psychosis and transformation. Traditions such as psychosynthesis, spiritual emergency, recognize the transformational potential of crossing that threshold. They tend to distinguish between psychosis and transformational crises. more and more this is seen as a false dichotomy, and that's where SCN comes from. And I'll be trotting through the research because I'm aware of the time. And Mike Jackson has this idea, one of the researchers, that when life gets stuck, or somebody needs to sort of create greater potential, that's when the threshold often gets crossed. But there is a danger of somebody getting stuck on the other side, and stigma and isolation and things. And that's where the, the disastrous sort of psychosis comes in. So, of course, what the Spiritual Crisis Network does is to help people to manage the threshold. Raising
1 minute
awareness.
left.
Sorry.
1 minute left.
Right. Awareness of it, grounding, mindfulness. I won't talk about that one, I haven't got time. High or low arousal, so that's obvious, breathing and mindful activity in the present. And people in crisis can cut themselves off, and this can push them into further crisis. They need to spend time with people around them, focusing on ordinary things. They need to make sense in ways of their experiences that are non-stigmatizing. This is where SCN comes in, the Zoom peer groups and all the rest of it. I haven't got time to go through the evidence, but there it is. I can give you the slides, and it's pretty powerful that having a non-stigmatizing way of making sense of all this is helpful. And that's, look at our website, Spiritual Crisis Network, and these are my books, Madness, Mystery, and the Survival of God. That's the very readable one. This is the one with all the research. And as I say, I'm a therapist, and these are the books about my approach to therapy. And here's the reading list, and that's my email. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Isabel. Again, another fascinating and informative presentation. So we're going to move into the question and answer section of this, and this will be for both Isabel and Pierre. And the way to do this is, if you have questions, type them into the chat and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So let's jump in. There's a comment from Ellen saying that wise mind is like the corpus callosum. Right?
Yeah, this is interesting because people tend to think in chunks of the brain and left and right brain and that sort of thing. The sort of scientific bit that I'm coming from says actually it's the connections within the brain, what connects and what doesn't, that's actually more critical. But it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make a difference to, helping people.
Okay. This is another question for Isabel. Do you think the term psychosis should be or will be replaced with another term in the future that helps society view it as a positive breakthrough of the psyche/evolution of consciousness, be supported rather than signaling mental illness that needs to be treated and suppressed? That's from Jillian.
Right, and it's an interesting one because, of course, as I indicated, it's perfectly possible to get lost in that place across the threshold. And that means that somebody's functioning goes down, risk increases, they can be very distressed. So yes, they need help, they need support. And as I say, the health services are probably the only people who can manage. And I've worked for 10 years in acute psychiatry in an acute hospital. And it was my mission to humanize that treatment. And I still work training teams of nurses and that sort of thing. So in a way, if the word psychosis is used for the state where it goes wrong in that way, but not with the idea that cuts somebody off forever from coming back. I mean, it's a term I try not to use too much myself. And the term I do object to is schizophrenia, because there is a suggestion there is a thing called schizophrenia. And, that has been actually scientifically really rubbished by people like Bentall. But, yeah.
Great, thank you. So this question is from Julianne, and this is for Pierre. Why do you name the model the game?
Oh, first I like analogy, I like poetry, I like metaphors. We could say the game is Lila, the Lila or Lila, I don't know how to say in English. The Lila is the cosmic game of consciousness, as Vedanta says. So we all are playing a game. We all are on that stage trying to live our life as we can. So the game is, or also the world is as you dream, no? We are all dreaming as if we are all living as if. So I say, for that I know, I could say as if we are playing a game. That game is a circuit of experience. That game is a dialogue between me and you, means between me and the world. And this dialogue between me and the world happens thanks to three subsystems in me that are linked also with embryogenesis and brain, and so feeling, acting, and thinking. When I say this is the game, I say this, we could say that the life has that pattern, that structure at the basis, and we should respect it and master all of these part of the game.
Great, thank you, Pierre. This is another question for you, Pierre, from David. Is the backstage the same as the shadow?
Yeah, this is interesting, because when we create a model, mainly if a model is so simple, square and circle, of course we have to apply the model into the life. So we can apply that model in any dualism of life. We can say that the stage is the light and the backstage is the shadow, but we also can say that the stage is the light and the backstage is the essence from the light comes from. And so we could say also that the backstage is the place where the shadow lie. And when light goes to the backstage, the shadow disappear. So are two different, a maps wants to, is a sort of basic model that says everything is, again, is a plane, is a dialogue between square and circle. So we can, if you take any dualism, we can put one on stage and another on the backstage, depending of your sight.
Okay, thank you. This is a question for Isabel from Megan. Do you provide training for therapists, and is there a similar organization in the US?
Right, yes, there are similar organizations all over the world. There's a spiritual emergency network. And Katie Mottram made very good contact with them when she was with us. I don't know, I haven't been, I'm not sure exactly what's happening in the States and elsewhere. That's one thing. They're not necessarily the same as us. I think we're possibly slightly more radical. We're less attached to therapy organizations. Training for therapists. I provide training for therapists, but not within Spiritual Crisis Network. I'm one of the team that provides training for volunteers, though it's actually a training that's useful for therapists as well. I mean, I provide training as part of my other work. And I said, yes, yeah.
Great, thank you, Isabel. This is a question for Pierre from Julianne. Can the game be won or lost, or just played?
You know, depending of the place you are and how to look at the game. We all know maybe the chakras, but also we could say that any chakra is a state of consciousness, and in any chakra is a place from where I look at the world. For example, if I am in the first chakra, stuck into the first chakra, which is live or die, the play is or I live or I die. If I am in the second, the game is pleasure or pain. If we are in the third, as you ask, I win or I lose. If I am in the fourth, I love or I hate. If I am in the sixth, in the fifth, I hold or I letting go. If I am in the sixth, I observe or I judge. If I am in the seventh, it is me that is doing or is the self that is doing. So depending of the place, the state of consciousness you are, if you want to focus on winning and losing, the life is winning and losing, the place winning and losing. It's up to you.
Great, thank you, Pierre. Another question for Isabel from Susan. There's actually two questions in this. One is there a liaison with the Spiritual Crisis Network and the psychedelic assisted therapy programs in the UK? And secondly, do you see a shift in the culture from the schism of psychosis versus spiritual transformation to integrating the transliminal into mainstream, lessening depression, anxiety, etc.?
Yeah, no, I mean, we are, as I say, we're quite a small group, and we're certainly one member who has actually stepped back more was taking part in that research, and you know, we're definitely interested. And I think one of somebody who is in one of the local groups has written a chapter in a book about the psych. So I would say there's peripheral connection. We're aware of it, and it's very interesting. The second question about a shift, I think there is a shift in. Certainly, there's a shift in making a distinction, you know, between psychosis and spirituality. I think that is. There are still people that are, you know, sort of going down that particular rabbit hole, but I think there's less of it now. You know, certainly the psychedelics are very relevant because, of course, psychedelics is, drugs are in fact the way in which people most normally in our society access the transliminal, you know, to a greater or lesser extent. I mean, that's the transliminal has been important in every society in one way or another. Religious practice and ritual and this sort of thing have been the more traditional ways of doing it, and indeed, you know, substances have been used throughout the ages. So yes. I think there's probably a bit of an awareness that sort of polarization, saying, you know, drugs are always bad, and you know, doctors' medication is good. That's definitely, you know, there's a lot of questions being asked about neuroleptics, and the psychedelics are being picked up as probably having a role. So, yeah, I mean, I think the transliminal and understanding the transliminal is important in understanding mental health issues across the board.
Great. Thank you very much. So there were expressions of gratitude for both of you for how informative and what service that your work, both your work has done. So thank you so much for your presentations and your work.